Salamat, Shane. Thank you. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see so many people here this afternoon. Okay, do we need to turn down the music or are we okay? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started while he's doing that. I do have my little notes so that way we can kind of go through this because I know everybody's time and I do want to respect that. Well, this morning I was actually at the mayor's conference, and in his talk, it resonated in me a couple of things that he said. Sense of belonging, connection, and social isolation. And it made me really think about the exhibit here and all of you. And it's so inspiring to see so many kababayans who found home here in the Silicon Valley and continue to instill our culture in the community they've become accustomed. I myself was born in the Philippines, Baguio City, for those of you who knows, to be exact, but grew up in Cavite City. I was already a teenager when we moved to San Jose and settled here. Just like many of you and your parents, I miss the culture and I need to be close to it. So when I started working for San Jose Public Library about 20 years ago, it really gave me lots of opportunities. I did bilingual story time in Tagalog, taught kids a few rhymes. I invited children's authors to read bilingual books. I invited filmmaker Marissa Arroy to educate our community about the Delano Manongs, the forgotten heroes of the United Farm Workers Movement. I continue to select Tagalog materials. I translate for the city of San Jose. I'm also a member of FACES, Filipino American City of San Jose, and have been president for many years. I'm also involved in organizing the flag raising to celebrate the annual Philippine Independence Day, on June 12th. And also in partnership with the Children's Discovery Museum, I was involved in the pre-installation of their community programs in highlighting Filipino culture. But enough about that. San Jose Public Library takes pride in constantly working and looking for ways to connect with our diverse communities, whether it be through our collection, which of course includes our Tagalog books, resources, programs, or in this case, specialized cultural exhibits like our Pinoytown Rising Filipino Americans in the Santa Clara Valley exhibit. The library is committed to dive into researching local history, preserving it, and telling the stories of all those who shaped our city and beyond. Through the library's California room, located on the 5th floor of this building, so if you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do so. We have staff who bring untold histories to light by tirelessly collecting and sharing materials. California Room includes an extensive collection of maps, photographs, manuscripts, our ever-expanding digital resources, which you can explore from the comfort of your home, including the most recent edition of San Jose Mercury News, Digital Historical Archive, which allows users to access newspapers from 1900 to 1985 and view the paper exactly the way it was published during those times. This exhibit came about through outreach efforts and community connection by our California Room staff, and what better time to have it on display for all to enjoy than during our Filipino American History Month, which is of course celebrated in October. And it took 3 months to create the exhibit, which consists of hundreds of artifacts led by families, which is about 14 families, and some of those who are here today. And I would like to, of course, recognize those families. So if I can have them stand up, because I do want to see those families who are here today. So if I can see them. Who are the 14 families who donated? Yes, of course. So the exhibit has been, the exhibit was curated by our wonderful California room staff, particularly by Shane Curtin and Ralph Pierce, who also deserve a round of applause. Of course, for all their work in making the first of its kind cultural exhibit here at San Jose Public Library. As part of our exhibit, today's program brings us all together to listen, learn, and connect to the history of Filipino families in San Jose and throughout the Valley. We're joined by 6 important and influential panelists in the Filipino American community, including our host, Robert Ragsack, who also contributed to our exhibit by sharing his knowledge, network, and ideas. And on behalf of San Jose Public Library and all of you here today, for continuing to build that connection and contributing to the history and instilling that culture, we thank all of you. So now I turn it over to Shane? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So like every exhibit we do here, this one began with a question, which is, which stories are untold? Which histories remain hidden? With this in mind, my colleague Ralph Pierce and I put our heads together. Ralph is a reputable figure in Santa Clara Valley's historical community, and he was doing that for a long time before I got here. He's the author of several books, most notably San Jose, Japantown, a History, which he co-authored with Kurt Fukuda. Ralph's efforts to document local Asian American history are what led him to connect with Filipino historian Robert Ragsack, and that is what planted the seed of this exhibit that would bloom over a decade later. So without further ado, Ralph, please come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. So nice to see so many familiar faces here, and new faces as well. Welcome. Let's see. Many of you may already know Robert Ragsack, or Manong Robert, as I often call him. I was fortunate enough to meet Robert during research for a book entitled San Jose Japantown, A Journey, which was published in 2014 with my co-author Kurt Fukuda, who's with us today. With Robert's guidance and assistance, Kurt and I began interviewing and gathering photos from many of the pioneering Filipino families. And following the publication of the book, Robert, Kurt, and I continued our interviews and photo gathering with the idea of maybe one day producing a book specifically about the Filipino American history here in Santa Clara County. So in the meantime, Robert has been writing, giving presentations, conducting walking tours of the area that he's coined as Pinoytown, an area nestled historically between Highlandville, Chinatown, and what is now known as San Jose, Japantown. Robert also worked with Kurt, who produced a wonderful series of videos for Hidden Histories of San Jose Japantown project, which he also worked with Tommy Zhu and Susan Hayase, and with the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. And those are all on YouTube. They're wonderful, so please go to YouTube and look up Hidden Histories of San Jose Japantown. And there's many wonderful videos which include vignettes on old Chinatown and Pinoytown as well. So let's see, what else? I guess at this point, please join me in welcoming Pinoytown historian and today's moderator, Manong Robert Ragsack.
I'm going to read Nuremberg of Malem. Magandang gabi. Magandang hapon. Good afternoon. Oh, that's right. Here I am. Are we on? Okay, so, excuse me. When we first walked into this room, I thought, God, this is really big. I don't think we're going to get that many people. Well, I'm standing in the standing room in the back. Seeing all of you here, after all the work that we've all done, really hits my heart hard. And I'm so happy to see you. Happy. You know my last name? It's Robert. It's Ragsak. If you know Ilocano a little bit, what's Naragsak? With the Ilocanos here. What does it say?
Happy.
Happy. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I read a bunch of notes, but I think we want to get to the program. But what I think is important is to acknowledge how I got involved in it. And it, as Ralph said, it was because of him and Kurt Bakuda and Kurt stand up. He's my mentor. He and I have done a lot of research. We don't call ourselves historians. We call ourselves history detectives. Because I'm not really an historian. I'm a retired aerospace systems engineer. When I first got into this, it was out of my discipline. I really didn't know anything about sociology, cultural anthropology, but I do know my heart says we have to do something about capturing the Filipino Americans and the Filipinos who first came here. So how did Pinoytown come into being? Well, if you remember your history, 1898, the war was over, and the Spanish American War was over 1898, and the Filipinos were happy that they defeated the Spanish. And they thought, well, America, we thank you, now go home. The Treaty of Paris made that. Unfortunately, the United States decided to stay, and they bought the Philippines for $20 million. So here comes the American culture via the educators, and they installed in the Philippine school system the educational curricula. So what happens? The Filipinos learn to learn English, and the others is that they have this great picture of America, right? They see America as the land of the golden promise. So they're seeing this, and you're talking to people from the barangay, from the province. And remember, as my dad said, we were almost a tribe at that time. So the American government decided they're going to have a new elite in the Philippines, and it's called the Pensionado program. So they had the pensionados, which are selected scholars, come to university in the United States, become educated, go back to the United States, and become the new elite for the government. That's one wave. The other wave is the sacadas. That's the contract workers for the Hawaii Sugar Planters Association. So what happened was, the Chinese Exclusion Act, no Chinese laborers. Remember the Chinese were here because of what? The railroads to begin with. So after the railroads were done, where would they go? They'd work someplace else, mostly in the fields or create businesses and create a Chinatown, which I'll talk about later. So the sacadas were given a 3-year contract. My dad was one of them. He had a 3-year contract. They put a necklace on him, put him on a boat, and he went to Hawaii. Many of the sacadas came to Hawaii, or if they wasn't a sacada, they would be migrants that wanted to come anyway. So there's a wave of Filipinos that came, settled, maybe ended up in Seattle, San Francisco, Long Beach. And so where would most of those Filipinos go? If they were unemployed, and here they are in the wonderful world of America, ready to earn their fortune. Well, remember, the very first sacadas in 1906, there were 15 of them. They were employed in Hawaii, and the first thing they found out, just like my dad told me, In his first job, he started crying. It was so hard. But he persisted, along with the other Filipinos, he said, "We'll come to America." I'm glad he did, because my sister, my brother, and I arrived. So what happened now? Where would the Filipinos go if they were laborers? Well, they would go to the ranches. So many of them came to the valley here. At that time, Valley of Hearts Delight. So if you were here in the valley, in San Jose, where would you shop? Well, it just so happens there was a Chinatown called Highlandville. Shane, do you have
A picture?
of the Chinatown and Japantown? So if you were Filipino, where would you want to shop? Well, in this place, in this map here, let me show you very quickly. This is the original Highlandville Chinatown. On 6th Street, this is what became known as Pinoytown. This is 6th Street. Jackson, Taylor, 5th, 6th, and 7th Street. Highlandville occupied this entire area. So if I'm, well, let's back up a little more. If I'm Japanese, now Highlandville, I should say, Highlandville was formed about 1887. The German immigrant offered the Chinese community at the time, whose Chinatown was burned down here in Market Street in San Jose in 1887. John Highland, a German immigrant, a white man, offered a Chinese community the land to build what became a Chinatown named Highlandville. So that's 1880. 1890, the Japanese Issei, first generation, came to the valley. Where would they shop without having problems with anti-Asian hatred, as we are sort of experiencing now? So they would go to Chinatown, to Highlandville. 1920, the first Filipinos started coming in, who were laborers. Where would they shop? They go to Highlandville, Chinatown. So there's the basis. You have the three races: Chinese, Japanese, and Filipinos, arriving here, and now they're going to form the basis for three minority enclaves over the years. Highlandville, Chinatown until the early 1930s, Pinoytown from 1920s to about 1960s, and we still have now Japantown. Now, you have to imagine what it was like. Down the middle of 6th Street, the Filipinos would be gathered on the evenings, Saturday evenings, and play in the pool halls, gamble, of course, and frequent all the restaurants. So, if you use your imagination, and I've tried to use this as before in other presentations, you look down straight down 6th Street. On both sides, the cars are parked diagonally. You can smell the Chinese restaurant, the Filipino restaurant. You can hear the dialects. And you hear the cars coming back and forth. And all the Filipinos line up on both sides, and the Chinese. And it turns out that it is a small version of the really big one in Stockton. And it was said that there's the largest gathering of a community of Filipinos in Stockton outside of Manila. So, now that's how Pinoytown came into being. Now, the Filipinos were mostly single men. They were mostly laborers. Although our descendants, if you're my generation, and they called us the bridge generation. But in home, our parents are no more than 5 years removed from a barangay with all of their social and cultural restrictions. So we grew up in an area where we go to a white school, we go home, and it's Filipino, Ilocano, Tagalog, Bisaya, Bicomano, whatever that dialect is. And so we are called the bridge generation, but we grew up that way, and of course a lot of us are trying to find our identity throughout our growing years. Okay, any questions so far about how, what, and why Pinoytown came to be? All right. Now, one of the things that I think is important is, how did I get involved in this? Well, as you mentioned very neatly by Ralph and Kurt, they asked me when they were doing their book that they thought that there was a Filipino community in the Japantown area. And I said yes. So I said I would take all of my friends, and if there were first-wave Filipinos available, we would interview them, get their albums, capture their stories. Unfortunately, as a retired aerospace engineer, I didn't think it was that important until they got me involved. And that started our involvement in creating Pinoytown tours, which for Filipino American History Month, this month, it's every Sunday. We do that in commemoration of Filipino American History Month. So I got involved that way, but I was supported by a lot of other people. Namely, I got support and got involved in some weird project called Hidden Histories Japantown. And I said, what am I going to do with that? I'm involved. And I have to put the blame on Tom Izu and Susan Hayashi. Stand up. Stand up. Come on, you got to become a history detective. Okay, today we have a panel that they each of whom have volunteered to represent their family. I'll go through it briefly and then we'll start it. We have Myrna Undahon Haskell. That's unique. Manong owned the ranch. Now, I should have said, when America took over the Philippines and became a colony, the Filipinos became American nationals. So, but what does that mean? That means you could just come to the United States without a visa or any issue problems. And so you didn't have to worry about the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Asian Exclusion Act. But if you're an American national, Filipino, you can't vote. You can't own land, and you better not marry outside your race. So that's a free benefit as an American national. So, we're not on that one. Ben Lagaska, who is, I consider to be the later part of the bridge generation, the younger ones. And our good friend, Pinky Rentar, he has a great story because Pinky is Filipino-Japanese. And my baby sister, Elaine Cragsek, equivalent. We all have a story to tell, and Myrna is going to start it off.
I am.
Yes, you are.
The art. No art. No art. Thank you.
Well, I need the art.
I got Mr. Wise Guy next to me. Anyway, thank you for coming. This is really overwhelming. And when I came here, I have my family here too. I have my brother Glenn Undahon, his son Jason. Can you raise your hand? My cousin Tita Hanolo Bladen, right there. She's my cousin Gloria, who hung out with Elaine and all of you here way back when, and also her son Gary and his wife Mary, and the latest member of the Undahon family, Aubrey. So there she is. 8 months old. Yes. Anyway, when Ben reached out to me and Manong Robert, I had donated some artifact to the Fons Museum in Stockton, and Robert had reached out to me and says, oh my God, I've been trying to find you because, he had a little story about knowing my family and working on our farm. So the story is my dad and my uncle came to California. My dad cut sugar cane in Kauai. My uncle was already here in California, and what my uncle did was go up and down the coast to see where to farm. They came from a town in Ilocos called Magsingal, and so my uncle came first, his older brother, so he wanted to see what area where to go. So he started out in Alaska and worked his way down, and finally down the road in Stockton, that's where they all met, I guess, where they all congregated, everybody did. So my dad earned enough money in Kauai cutting sugarcane and met my uncle, and then they tenant farmed wherever they could. They cut asparagus, they did a lot of back-breaking labor, and then they settled in Santa Clara County on the Brant Ranch. So I think that's where a lot of these farming people that we knew, they were my aunts and uncles. I think they were the Cristobal family, the Miguels, a lot of big farming families that I know and kind of lost touch with. And since these guys were a little bit older than me, excuse me, I'm a little overwhelmed. A lot of it is coming back to me because my family would talk about it, but kind of a little bit hush-hush. But I'd hear bits and pieces. My cousin Gloria, who was older, she kind of took me under her wing and would bring me to these gatherings and things, and I was the little one. Because when they asked me to participate in this, looking at the age group, I'm the younger generation. These guys were the ones that paved the way for my generation. So, I don't know what else to say. I thought I had something to say.
Where the ranch is located.
Pardon?
Where the ranch is located.
Oh, the farm is located on Mayberry Road over by Independence High School. Part of our property was Independence High School, and we farmed strawberries back in the 50s, 60s. Now, I remember there's a lot of us here that worked on the farm. There's Mary Lou here. That's what we did as kids. We worked on the farm. We picked strawberries. What else did we pick? Chilies.
Blackberries.
What was it?
Blackberries.
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Blackberries.
Yeah, we did. Their parents would drop them off on the farm, and that's what they did all day. We would pick raspberries, strawberries, or chilies and stuff. That was our summer money. That's what we would do, and we got to socialize while we were picking. And growing up on the farm, I was kind of isolated. These guys grew up in town.
Closer to the mic. Closer to the mic.
Oh, do I push it down?
No, just talk.
Okay. Anyway, growing up on the farm, we were on the farm. We were out in the country. So our social life was going into Japantown, Pinoytown, Chinatown. My family, my dad would deliver produce to Dabashi Market. I don't think it's even there anymore. I see Santo Market still there, and there's Nishioka Fish Market. And we would go help deliver produce because we would get a little bit of money and go shopping at the little stores there. And that was our social life. And then the Filipino Community Center was there, and that's where we would all socialize. There would be parties and dances, and that was where everybody would congregate and where we would meet, and it was social for us because we weren't around a lot of people in town, because my dad would say, we're going into town, and town was Pinoytown. That's where we went. And what else?
You owned the land. Your dad owned the land because the Filipinos couldn't own it.
Right, so my family bought the farm. Growing up as a child, we were told, gee, we worked really hard, and if you work really hard, this is what we worked hard for. We bought this farm, and it was always, we bought this farm in cash back then, because they made money during World War II. They had wanted to sign up during the war effort. They tried to enlist, but the Army turned them down and told them no, that since they were farmers, they needed to raise food for the armies, or raise food in general. So that's what they did. So They worked really hard on this farm. I think it was owned by a Portuguese man that leased the property to my uncle and my dad, and they were able to buy it after the war. So that's where I grew up. It was a good living. We worked hard. It was a place where a lot of people would gather. I know there's a lot of you here that came to the farm for all the farm parties. We would have barbecues, a couple of weddings, christenings usually were at the farm. We would butcher meat, and it was a big party every time we did that, so it was a lot of fun. People would come from all over. I have a close friend here, Marie, who we reconnected after all these years, and her family was in San Francisco, and her family is related to my ninong in San Francisco, because as a child we would go over to we would go into San Francisco, and that was like a big deal for us to go into the city, get dressed up to go to the city to see our relatives there. And they would come to the farm and spend the day. They would pick produce, or they would participate in butchering, like we do goats, pigs, and then they would bring things back to their house. So, I don't know what else to tell you. Ben told me to talk like I'm on my cell phone, so. So, anyway, any questions?
When did it stop being a farm?
They sold the farm back in the 80s. My dad and my uncle were getting up in years, so early 80s, late 70s. Yeah. And there's a street named after my family. When you go up to the exhibit, there's a street sign that we found when my brother Ron got married, and so we have the sign. But it's still there. It's right off of Maybury Road. There's a housing tract there, right by the high school, and by the park. Where's that? The park, the Filipino Park, or the Manong?
Oh, on Camille Way, Delano Park?
Yeah. What's the Delano Park?
Yeah, Delano Manong Park.
Then there's also the Delano Manong Park that's close by. So which I haven't gone to yet.
Yeah, I should say that through the efforts of a lot of the Filipino organizations, we were able to get one of the city's parks named after the Delano Manos. And that's what I'm wearing here, is Delano Manos. And by the way, anybody know what Manong means? In Ilocano, older brother. Okay. In a general context, I'm an older brother to a whole lot of the youngsters here. The Delano Manong's Park is at Gamili Way on Capitol, near the Target store. So if you have a chance, you can visit the park. It's a small park, but it's one of the very first to be named in honor of the Delano Manongs. And the Delano Manongs were the ones who survived the Great Strike in 1965, with Larry Itleong leading the strike, supported by Sheila Chavez. And our next speaker.
Good, thank you. There's a lot of people here that I haven't seen in years. My goodness, this is really emotional for me to be around everybody here.
He's one of the guys I can hardly get stopped talking.
I know.
Come on, get moving.
Is this on or what? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the light on.
So,
Hi, I'm Ben Lagoska. I'm the last surviving son of a family of 3 boys. I'm the middle child. I'm the one that got picked on both sides because I was the innocent person. I never caused anybody any problems because I wasn't called bungalow for nothing. Bungalow was actually, well, I don't know the true terminology of what that means, but it means somebody that's unruly and doesn't behave quite well, especially to orders. I'm a product of the environment. I went to a Catholic school where I had to speak English. When I broke out in Ilocano, I was put in a little dark room called the closet, so it gave me a mental block not to speak English or not to learn Ilocano. And it takes me back to something that I was told, but I don't know how true it was, but if in the Philippines, when they took the vote for Tagalog to be the national language, voting systems weren't quite got to, what do you want to call it, American standards, other than Florida. Ilocano could have been a national language. You can look at the history of how many presidents were Ilocano versus the science of Tagalog. There's a reason for things like this. I've not done a lot of research, other than the fact that I've done my family tree. I started it back in 1960 on my first trip, and then 3 other subsequent trips I embellished it and made it larger, started including people who were like, my mother's name was Jacob, it goes back to Corpus, it goes back to Jimenez, it goes back to, one more, Villalon. Okay, so there's more there, but I can't remember the whole tree, because at least 1700s, if I go back accurately. I was working on a 35-year span, because how long did people live in those days? So you don't know. So a lot of it's guesstimation and verbal history. Growing up in San Jose was a very interesting thing for me, and my parents were not I would call the family life a functionally dysfunctional family, because we only met at breakfast or dinner because my dad either worked or my mom worked, and not everybody was there. So conversation was not the best thing going on in our house. So my younger brother and I were like thinkers. He did the schoolwork, I went and played. My older brother was the babysitter. And my oldest brother was 10 years older than I, and that put him in Robert's group. I'm in the middle, in the 40s. Myrna's back a few years beyond that, so she's another generation away. So there's a decade of information that is not shared because we have different social groups. Robert's group, there was a mob. there were brothers, the Ragsacks, the Quiblins. Who else was there from your group? Families. You know, last name. There were Escalante. Okay, so there was quite a few, at least 15 kids that would get together. In my group, maybe 3, 4. Pinky was one when he came off 6th Street. Regala family, Rami was my best friend. You know, we wrestled and threw rocks at each other. And as we grew in time, we did all the naughty things and all the good things together. So we shared different things. We saw what the elders were doing, we saw what the younger were doing. In my group, I turned out to be the thinker person, got involved in the arts, but I also had a background in electronics. So when I quit teaching college back in 84, I graduated from high school in '60, so college was not for me because nobody was dying and retiring anyway. So I couldn't live on a part-time scale, so I joined the engineering world and I became a design engineer. So if you have a flat panel in your house, our test machines your panels probably came up with test machines that we designed in those days. There was only 3 companies in the world doing tests, and one was in Japan, we had 2 in the States. So that was the versioning of the flat panel world. And it scares me because the flat panels go into medical equipment, and I'm laying down on a gurney in a hospital having my heart filleted, and I'm looking up at this one of my monitors that I'm looking at, so I'm going, well, I hope that passed my QA. So, you know, it's one of those funny things where things come around and go around and come back again at you. So, you know, you never escape your history. So it's growing up on 5th Street, by the way, was a separate world from the people who lived on 6th Street, Pinoytown Street, because there were more Filipinos on 6th Street than on 5th Street. The only 2 families then was the Lagasca family, and next door to my left was the Anning family. Okay, so that was us. That was the Filipinos. We had Germans, Italians, Japanese, Chinese. We had a very mixed neighborhood. We all went to the same high school, San Jose High School. So I grew up in a very diverse cultural group where we got along. There was no problem. Religion wasn't an issue in those days, so I don't know whether we had Jews on the streets or not, or we had any Methodist or whatever, but, you know, religion does in time play into your upbringing. But one of the better parts next door was one of the priests that used to be at the Buddhist temple in San Jose lived next door. He moved there about the 1960s, I believe. I was still in high school, yeah. And he would do the morning gong, do his prayers, and I'm going, oh, I just got back from an all-night drinking party at 4th Street Boulevard, where all of us would hang out, Filipinos, Japanese. It was the center of physical activity, of gambling, and think you're playing pool, or you're a bowler and you're gambling while you're bowling. I mean, it was just a great social thing. Except when you had to wake up to the morning prayer. You know, but it was still nice because I learned about meditation and peace and harmony, and I got involved with learning how to put myself together. My younger brother became a social worker, and I used to call him the guy down the hallway because he lived in the other room. We used to share a room together, but we had 2 doors, and he had to go out that door, and that was my door. So we had these little conflicts about sharing at times, but we got through all that, and we learned to share, and we all learned to appreciate our differences. And by that time, Paul was out of the house and had our wonderful niece Marcia over here, you know, the oldest child of my friend and Paul. And my group grew up moving around on bicycles and things like that. We used to drive up. We used to pedal all the way down past Mayberry Road and learn to pick fruit along the way because we needed energy, so we just go and harvest our way up the road. So on the left side of the street were the apricots, prunes, cherries, and we just ate all the way. You know, we were just picking all the way. And we'd get up to Elm Rock Park and play around the park, go swimming up there at the big pool that used to be up there. And because of the hill coming down Santa Clara Street, we just glided right down. All that hard work turned into a nice easy ride coming home. So we do that at least once a month, once every 2 months, just because we were bored. Our house was the center for everybody to show up and watch the first black and white TV in the neighborhood. So when you wanted to find your kids, you just count the bikes in front of the house to see who was over there. You know, we had great hide and go seek things, you know, games like that. Peter Burnett was just up the street, so we'd play football in the street, but we had to go to the park to play baseball. So we did break a few windows in playing, so we were forced to kind of go to the park. Growing up in J-Town, Pinoytown was really good for me. It was a black church there that I used to hang out and listen to the gospel music, and it was really a great experience to listen to that. Where Pinky and I would pick up a few stories about what's going on in J-Town. We were little frogs rolling around the town, they're hopping around. I learned to get involved with the Filipino community for some reason. I think that interest in becoming politically involved happened because I paid attention to what my family was doing. They had family gatherings. The family gatherings became an organization. The Native Sons and Daughters. Actually, it was 2 groups. There's the United Sons and then the Native Sons and Daughters of Lopog. One was in San Francisco and ours was in San Jose. We were the United, the others were the Native Sons and Daughters, who next year will have their 100th year anniversary. So continuous time as an organization, functional organization. Whereas the Ilocanos here in San Jose have become their own little quiet lives and not involved too much politically because it's just a lot of work learning to live in Santa Clara County. You just don't have spare time. Or part of the things that I mentioned with Kurt in one of the films was that I used to enjoy being involved in the Japanese functions because they were active, they were busy, they produced their culture. I mean, they were doing things that was great. They brought people together. And all my friends actually in high school were Japanese. I was the Kalesa driver. I had the only car, so I had the taxi pickup service. I picked up all my Meihunjin buddies, you know. So the Takedas, the Hashimoto's, Tobashis, we just had a circuit. And we'd scrum around for money, like, who's got money for gas? You know, gas was 29 cents a gallon. You know, and putting together our pennies and nickels was really tough sometimes. But it was a great growing up place for me, especially. But through watching my parents' organization or get together, I think that's how they survived as a cultural group. They stayed together as a unit, like a tribe. And we've lost that tribal spirit now in Santa Clara County. It's too big. And the hall that used to be on 6th Street was a great place to meet. But because of the need to have recreational facilities, card gaming and gambling kind of took over, and I didn't quite like that. I didn't, you know, I was involved in the community, I didn't like that at all. By that time, the senior citizens, the White Panthers were coming on and so forth. ESSO is working and developing, and I'll take credit, but I can't prove it, but I pulled Jacinto Sakig out of the farm group as a senior citizen and sent him over with me to AKI, Asian American Community Involvement, when AKI was still forming. I was on the executive steering committee way back then. And I brought him in because I was not a social worker. I don't do social work. My brother moved to Washington, so became an instructor in private, that's what do you call that crazy thing?
Practice.
Yeah, so he did that kind of work. So the Northside Center became the offshoot of that activity of getting the senior citizens together. I got the old timers out of the old community building, Filipino community. They had to form a separate organization so that ESSO could look at them, so they get private funding to become an organization for Parks and Recreation, give them a building, which they lost because of mismanagement and foresight of not following the audit requirements by the city of San Jose. So all that effort that I felt very attached to was blown away and lost. So I don't really know what's going on. The frustration of all that made me think about not fighting anymore. I got tired. So now I'm a retired artist living in my barn in San Martin with my wife, who always tells me to come in the house, it's late, 9 o'clock. I love you, dear. But it's better to be 2 o'clock closing the bar, right? So anyway, my bar's in the barn anyway, so I have a refrigerator out there. So I continue to do my art, and I can be political now. And see, I am having a Morgan Hill open studios next coming weekend. I have flyers here, but that's next weekend, and it's totally free to the public. They have it in San Jose now as well. But the important thing about the community is that the Japanese community has been a stalwart in it. They just had good programs, and I organized one fiesta. Street fiesta. I had street clothes. I was working with Alice Balahaja. I don't know what happened to that family. But we put a street festival on. We had 2 days of dance, music, food, speakers, and I wanted to try to find a way to get the community to realize it was a good thing to do. Because I said we could add our culture into the Japanese culture. We'd have a lot of energy going on 5th Street and 6th Street. But there's no follow-up because I don't know what it is in our culture. It just banding together as a group has been tough because we like to be families at home only. And the tribal thing is what's really necessary to keep this community alive. I'm glad that this is happening because it'll be put on tape and kids can see this in school now. All right, so the reason why I'm wearing this t-shirt, the word influencers on it, and it's because I bring ideas to the table. I'm willing to sit somewhere and bring ideas to the table. Off the wall stuff. Because conservatism runs everything and we gotta quit being conservative and move forward and come up with better ideas and better solutions. This whole country needs that. So that's why I wear this shirt. That's why I used to be in community work. Because it's important to be involved in your community. You know, support your library. They just had a strike. Read books. Why are they banning books? All right. So what's freedom of speech all about? So now you got me. I've got myself worked up to be a politician. So it's fighting for the people. You're the people. You know, and People don't want to stand up. I get upset about that. I'm tearing up, I'm welling up in emotion. That's part of the reason why it's not easy to be a person in community work. Because you have to let your emotions out. You gotta speak up. That's all I have to say. My buddy Pinky.
Outstanding. Eugene Pinky Rendar.
Okay. Well, he said a lot about, growing up in the Filipino community. Did I have to turn this thing on? Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's better than sound. But anyway, Ben here, he said a lot of things growing up in the Philippine community. And I grew up right in the heart of the Philippine center of the whole thing. So I've experienced a lot of crazy and wild things going up in that area. The Filipino thing, but I remember the black churches talking about, and that got me into music, because I played in bands and things. I'm a drummer and everything, and then the other side was the Chinese restaurant, King Low, right? And then the back was the Buddhist church, and across the street was, so I got into all these different cultures, and especially the black, I'd go out there and some of my black friends would be jamming in the Filipino community, when it used to bring everybody in there. They brought the guitars, we made music in there, but it was a very beautiful time growing up as a kid, and all the Filipino families that lived in that area all moved out, and it became just a plain boarding house. But my experience growing up, it wasn't unusual life for me growing up, because I didn't have a mother, and we come to that because I think they have a big write-up of what happened to my mother and my father, and it's all on the 5th floor, I think. You'll see a picture of my mother, which I never knew. But the story begins with my father. He came here in 1926. And he came from, he was from Ilocos or Cabugao. If anybody's here from Cabugao, well, there used to be a Cabugao Association that started there, and the Dimasalong started there in 1926. When my dad first came here, he was just 18 years old, and they organized the first, the Malvar Lodge of San Jose. The Dimasalong was the biggest organization in the United States. In fact, it was the first Filipino organization to start in the United States. It was the Caballero Dimasalong. And I think it originated from Stockton, and then they were building lodges around, the Californian states. And then in 1926, when my dad was here, he was one of the pioneers, the first 12, to sign when they started the Dimasalong organization. And it was Malvar Lodge, San Jose, and that time it was a beautiful organization. The families and everything. It was a very nice organization that all the Filipinos that joined that group. It was so like a family. I could tell a lot of stories with that organization, but unfortunately, as the years went by and everything, things got a little corrupted. I even joined. I didn't want to join, but my dad, he was a big, he had the best, highest thing in that, whatever, but. With my generation, Ben's generation, football came along and things, I was to be home watching the 49ers or something, going to a Filipino meeting, or joining anything. And I think that's how some of it died down. Well, yeah, he wants me to talk about my mother. Well, I'm getting to that. Well, but that story, like I said, I never knew my mother, but somehow my father and mother met, And there was, I guess, those kind of, I don't know, rough times, where the first generation Japanese, the Papa San was the boss, but he says the family has to obey, and I guess they didn't like it, they went with different nationalities that time, not like today. And so I guess that's how my dad met my mother. And then during the war, when I was born, my father was trying to hide my mother from going to the concentration camp in 43. But they got caught. So my father went to jail. They sent my mother to a relocation camp in Utah. So I was born in Topaz, Utah, California. Utah. That was one of the big Japanese relocation camps. And then my father, I think when he got out of jail, he went to the camp and got me out. Because my mother, I don't know what happened. I don't know so much about what happened there. But then my mother, my father came and got me. So that's how I was raised in San Jose. I was baptized at Holy Cross Church, went to grad school and that, and do this guy here. Anyway, when they came out, these church were happy to my mother, and till this day, I'm thankful to Kurt Fukuda and Ralph and Ragsack here, because when this, when they were organizing this show here or whatever, then I was just telling Ragsack about my story, the thing. And I didn't think it was going to be such a big thing because, we never knew what happened to my mother after that. They researched on it and they did, Kurt did a lot of work on it and things, but and there were things I didn't know they found out about my mother, and I was just grateful they found out what happened. But what happened, that was the end of the story there. They couldn't know what happened. But yeah, I guess they just, Ragsack here, Robert thought maybe it was one of the greatest Filipino love stories. I don't know. But so like I say, I don't know, but it would have been nice they were here because what they produced, if they were still together, of course they had me, then they had 7 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, and I don't know how many great-great, 9 or 8, but I just learned I had another great-grandchild born. In fact, I think my oldest daughter is here, June. I think she knows how many great-grandchildren there is. June, can you tell how many great?
She's still counting.
I lost count on the great. These are the greats on my father's side.
13 great.
Great, really? 13. Well, see,
14.
15 on the way.
Well, I guess every month, I don't know. But it just shows how the generations of Filipinos, that first came here, and like now, like I'm a great-great-grandfather, it's just hard to believe that I have that many, great-great-grandchildren and grandchildren that now you know why I'm broke every holiday. I'm just kidding, but it's just it's just an experience. And there's one story he left out, Ben left out what we used to do. Remember we used to go to Uncle Andy's farm and pick string beans.
Oh,
And after we picked...
I saved that for you.
Yeah, we used to go up on the billboard and count all the cars go by on the freeway. That time there was hardly cars on 101. but today we probably would have lost count. And talking about Mr. things, but like I said, just growing up in the Filipino, right in the center of the core, you know, and born when there was winter time, when my father was working, he put me to the Tremelius family, which they watched me a few times, and that got with the Villaroos, and unfortunately one of the speakers here hurt himself. He fell and got hurt, and he couldn't be here, but I was looking forward to see him because I haven't seen him for years. Yeah, Art Villaroos, because he had a lot of roots with the Filipinos growing up. But I could go on and on with a lot of stories with how just growing up in the core of the Philippines. And you're talking about gambling. There was a little bit more than gambling going on. But that's the Xbox. But it was an experience, and like I said, my father, he was the last to move out of the area, the Filipino thing, you know, because when they condemned all the buildings, everybody had to move out. But their house was the last one. So he was just like the last of the Mohegans to move out, and it's just a shame. Like when I go there now, you know, and I look where I grew up. In fact, you'll see some of my baby pictures when I was just maybe a year old on that thing there, and that was the original where the Filipino community was, you know, right on 6th Street, and. There were just so many stories I couldn't tell what went on, but if you want to know, just ask me after this thing is over, because I know we're pressed for time. But just enjoy just relating some of the good stories to share what went on in the real Filipino town. Thank you.
Let me add a little bit more to the Rentar drama. His mom was named Midori Kawamura. When Emil Rentar met Midori, she was Midori Kawamura. Not Kawamura, but Morokita. She was Morokita, Mrs. Morokita. And she met Emil Rentar. Now, Emil and Midori are only one of two known Filipino-Japanese marriages, liaisons that I know of. One is a true marriage of our era. And if you know the culture of the Japanese and Filipinos at the time, you marry within your culture, right? If you don't, particularly Japanese, now you're talking about the Japanese culture here in the 1930s, 1920s. So Midori would have been outcast if they found out about her. But she hid with Emil Rentar in Milpitas, in a ranch. And as Pinky said, they were caught and arrested. And that, his story has been written by Kurt, and it's in the exhibit upstairs. But I wanted to say that when we heard of Pinky's story about his mom, Midori, we tried everything to find out about her. We know she left Topaz internment camp in 44. It was 44, Kurt? Yeah, it was 44. She went to Ottumwa, Iowa. Ottumwa, Iowa. So we thought, well, that's easy to find her. So Kurt did a great search to Ottumwa Historical Society, the county records, everything. The entire family disappeared. We don't know anything about it. That was the end. But we did find out that she had a relative that was in the Marine Corps. And I happened to be on the board of directors of the Filipino Historical Society, which is a military organization. So I asked one of my friends, who was a real expert at finding the service records, which is called the DD-214. So we tried to search for the DD-214 for her relative. We found it, but unfortunately, Pinky is too far removed to be able to claim the DD-214. So the search ended. We did everything. I think Ralph was able to get a person who did genealogical research. We did everything possible to find Midori, and she has disappeared completely. But we did everything we can to help Pinky find his mom.
Thank you.
My baby sister, Elaine.
Well, yes, my name is Elaine, ransack equivalent. I'd like to let the young ones talk now. You're going to hear the older ones talk. I'm going to take you back to the late 30s, how it was for me growing up. During, I think we got part of the deep depression time, late 30s. We didn't have much because our families were not very wealthy. They were farmers, worked hard. And I'd like to say that I remember when growing up, so we grew up in Chinatown. I call it Chinatown, you guys call it Pinoytown today. But I remember as a child in the late 30s that things were not that great. We had some good times, some unhappy times. But I remember that the Salvation Army would come and drop off turkeys, turkey for our dinner. And that's something that I know you guys don't know that today. So it was a hard time for us. So as I grew up, going into the early 40s, we were going into, I think during World War II. It was a hard time. I remember growing up with all the Japanese kids that we had in our community. I remember going to, no, I have to back up a little bit. I remember at night, I could hear the children crying, people talking very softly. And I asked my mom, I said, "Mom, what's going on?" She says, just be quiet, honey. And what was happening, they were taking all the Japanese kids, the families, to camp. And that was a hard time because I remember going back to school, the children, the Japanese kids of my best friends were not there. And I didn't understand that because they were all going to camp. It was a hard time for us growing up as kids. But after a while, though, they came back from camp, which was good because I got to see all my friends again. But I remember going into Chinatown, or J-Town as you guys know it now, that the stores, the bashis, were all closed up. The windows were all boarded up. And I mean, it was a difficult time as a child growing up in a time during World War II. I can remember on 5th Street, we lived next door to Happy House, and I remember during the war, the air raid wardens would come and make sure that our windows were locked up, you know, with curtains, no lights were on, and he wanted to make sure that you couldn't go out. It was a curfew, you couldn't go anywhere, so the air raid wardens would make sure that everybody would stay in the house. That was a difficult time. I didn't understand. It was kind of scary. They had spotlights searching in the night. It was a difficult time, I think, for me as a child growing up. Then as we go into Chinatown, or Pinoytown, I remember going shopping with my mom on Highlandville. That was the street between 6th and 7th Streets. Right, Robert? And there were no sidewalks. There were boarded sidewalks. And I remember the Chinese guys, as they called them, coolies, but that's all how I grew up, knowing who they were. Because my mom would go shopping at the Chinese restaurants and grocery stores. So that was a good time for me because I thought it was really exciting. And then we go on to 6th Street. see, I grew up on 5th Street, and we would go run into the lobby, the alleys, going into 6th Street and going to the Filipino restaurants and grocery stores. And it was a time for when all the Manones would, because they all worked in the farms, so when they came into Chinatown, they were all dressed up, and they looked so sharp because, I mean, you know, they even went to the beaches in suits. That was a time where I never understood that. Well, today, you know that, we go in our shorts. But then, in that time, they went in their suits, which was kind of, they looked so good all the time. But my brothers, Robert and Reuben, would shine shoes for how much, Robert? 25 cents? 25 cents. And all the Manones would have their suits on and shining shoes, and these guys were out there making, how much did you make for 25 cents? Oh my gosh.
Something was 2 bits.
I know.
25 cents.
25 cents each shine shoes. And if you go in, did you bring your shoe shine box, Robert? I think it's
on
in the
display.
exhibit. It's on display in the exhibit. But this was a time, you could walk down 6th Street between Taylor Street and Jackson, and all the Manones was so crowded there. You couldn't walk on the sidewalk because everybody was there, crowded as all heck. I mean, you know, but you can go there today, it's not that crowded. But then in our time, it was so crowded with all the workers. But my brother Reuben and I were, Reuben was the curious one. He would take me, I think it was in Highlandville, we'd go up to I can remember a brick building, and we wanted to look in the windows. It was on the 2nd floor. And I told my brother, I said, what are we doing here, Ben? He says, just listen, we gotta see what's going on. So we would walk around upstairs, and this was a Japanese building, Robert, do you remember what the name of that was?
No, which one? Where?
When we walked in, well, we could hear the mahjong, they were playing mahjong, the click of the mahjong, but you also would hear girls giggling. Did you know what was going on back there? The curtains were drawn, you couldn't hear anything, but you couldn't see anything, but you could hear. But you know, prostitution then and gambling was going on. But we didn't know that, but we were just having fun looking, trying to find out who's who. But, my brother Reuben, he would get me into trouble, but we were so curious to see everything going on. But it was a fun time for us. I don't know, Robert, my sister Helen, who's 95 years old, I'm sorry that she could not be here. And but she could tell you so much more. I mean, you know, growing up in our time, the kids don't know that today. And I wish that, I try to tell my great-grandkids, I have 15 great-grandchildren, 10 grandchildren, and they're here. Some of them are here. Hi, guys. In the regalas. I love you guys. Anyway, I don't know. Anybody want to have any questions about what it was like growing up? You know, we had in our time, we didn't have TVs. We didn't have telephones. But as we got older, we did have that black and white TV and three-party line telephones. And you know, my girlfriends and I would say at 3 o'clock, pick up the phone and we'll talk. And you know, so that was quite different. But I can't remember anything else, Robert. Is there anything else you want me to?
You guys had great music.
Yes, yeah. But that was later on in life. But I wanted to capture what it was like when we were young, and how I watched the Manongs play sipa in the streets on 6th Street. I'm sorry, the old Manongs, but they were young, 20, 30-year-old guys playing on the street. Do you know what that's the bamboo ball? What do you call it? Sipa. And
You'll see that.
where?
You'll see the movie.
Oh, okay.
But don't say anything.
Okay, I won't say anything. But I think that's about it for me growing up as a kid, and Chinatown being the way it was. It was a great time for all of us. And we got to see the change of from nothing to the new technology that we have today.
Let me, I guess I'd add a little bit about my mom and dad. My dad is from Barangay Tonyana, Santa Catalina, Ilocos. He left, he had gone to Bigan to see about getting a summer job. Just so happens that the Hawaii Sugar Planters Association was there. So my dad and his friend decided to sign up and be contract workers. But my dad was too young, so he used his older brother's birth certificate, Burnaby and Ragsack. So with that false document, my dad was able to sign a contract with the Hawaii Sugar Planters Association. So in 1924, he boarded the trucks in Vigan, Ilocos to Manila. He boarded the Siberian Maru, and he stopped in Tokyo, and then he ended up in Honolulu. And in Honolulu, he was assigned by the HSPA, Hawaii Sugar Planters Association, to work in the Oa'a plantation. While he was there at Oa'a plantation, that's where he first experienced what I told you, the very, very hard job of working on a pineapple plantation and cutting sugar cane. He just happened to have some friends from Vigan that wrote to him that they were working in Kauai. So my dad was able to get on board a boat to go to Kauai. There he met his friends from the barangay, and he started working in the sugarcane fields. And he had met a fellow Filipino also named Sergio. So the two Sergios became close buddies. And in fact, they had a little enclave there in Kauai at the Waimea sugar mill. When my dad was working in the fields, his friend Sergio was a daredevil. He was liked to ride on top of the cane haul train. And unfortunately one day he slipped and got killed. Well, his wife was my dad's good friend. So my dad tried to counsel her, to help her through that terrible event. But as you know where this is going. He counseled her, and in fact he tried to woo her. Now, there's a term called harana, or in Tagalog, it's called tapat in Ilocano, which means you serenade your sweetheart. That's the old style. My dad played the guitar, and so did Sergio, his friend Sergio. He played guitar, and so he would woo Mrs. Baris. Her name was Baris at the time, B-A-R-I-S. So he finally got able to get close to her, and in the meantime, his two brothers, Leoncio Ragsack, and we have the Leoncio Ragsack family here, Effie, Arlene, and Roy, and Burnaby Ragsack. And I'm not sure we have any of the Burnaby Ragsack family here, no. So there's three of them. So my dad and his sweetheart got on board a boat, went to Honolulu. While there, they decided, why don't we just get married? So they got married in the Presbyterian Church, boarded a boat, ended up in San Pedro. Now, as I mentioned, they were American nationals. So American nationals, all they had to do was just get on the boat. And they ended up at San Pedro, and the only delay they had was to be quarantined because of possible diseases. So they cleared quarantine, got on a train, met Yoncho and Burnaby at, I think it was San Luis Obispo, on a train. And so when they're on a train, they ended up here in San Jose and a ranch in Edenville. So they lived there for a while in Edenville. And they ended up finally coming up where everybody else was, in Pinoytown. And our house was at 639 North 5th Street, directly across the existing Buddhist temple. So that became our lives then at that time. And so, with Robert Montgomery and John Wayne. And in that movie, in the very beginning, when you see the announcement to the servicemen that Pearl Harbor is bombed and they're being all called to the duty stations, and Pasing is on the stage singing, I think it was God Bless America. Well, in 1943 summer, Pasing asked several Pinoys if they would be willing to gather together, learn to dance, and go down to entertain the servicemen. And my sister was one of them. But she was too young to go. She was only 15. So she asked my mom, Mary Ragsack, if she can go, but only if my mom was as the chaperone. So that was the arrangement. And and four others, there were 6 of Pinoys from the local area. They all went to Camp Cook and learned the Philippine dances. The popular one at the time was called the Carinosa. And also, it just so happens that Howard Hill, Hollywood director, wanted to film all the goings on, and he showed the entertainment of the Filipino troops. And there was a film made in summer 43 and aired in 1944, and we have that particular film.
It'll show up on this screen too, for folks in the back.
Filipino Regiment. But theirs is a double incentive, the liberation of their beloved country. To these men, there can be no compromise in their ultimate aim, the restoration of their land to its former states. Hour after hour of rigid training and strenuous military maneuvers brings them closer to the momentous task that lies ahead. But despite these arduous measures, and the fact that many miles separate them from their homeland and loved ones, they have not overlooked their native customs, games, and sports. Here we see what looks like an old-fashioned picnic. Well, actually it is, but to use the native term, it is known as a lechon. Translated literally, the word lechon means roast pig. But the meaning is all though now it is the equivalent of the American barbecue. Accompanied by their wives and sweethearts, this is a gala day for the boys of Camp Cook. Howard Hill, renowned traveler and world-famous archer, is frank to admit he's never seen anything that so impressed him as did his visit to Camp Cook. Besides the carefully prepared feast, consisting of such delicacies as barbecued pig, there are games and exhibitions. For instance, there is a demonstration of judo, the Filipino style of wrestling, in which all members of the 2nd Regiment excel. Besides the thorough knowledge of how to apply and break the numerous complicated holds, a cool head, responsive mind, and the agility of an acrobat are most essential. Judo is a real man's sport. Oh, pardon me, but the ladies like it too. Perhaps this will demonstrate that size or weight are of little or no advantage to the untrained opponent. To a skilled judoist, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Here's a simple way to ward off a bolo attack. Simple, if you don't know how, but that's judo. This is a steeple ball in the making, woven by hand either from rattan or bamboo strips. The basket-like ball is used in the native Filipino game, from which it derives its name, teapot. As the spectators gather around, the players take their places within the circle. The object of the game is to keep the ball in the air by kicking it. Any portion of the foot may be used. A good team of steeple players will often keep the ball in action for 10 minutes or more without allowing it to touch the ground. The skill of the player is in his footwork. So, Howard Hill wants to try it, eh? Well, come on. Here's the ball. Let's see how good you are. Here we go for the kickoff. That means you'll have to sit in the center of the ring and stay there until somebody else sits. But it looks as though he's going to have a long wait. Doesn't anybody ever miss? Look at that ball fly, and the players barely move from their original position. If something isn't done to stop it, this game is going far on into the night. It's a good trick if you can do it. And he did. So ends this round of teapot. Here, with his yo-yo, is another expert from the ranks of our 2nd Filipino Regiment. A fascinating pastime. The yo-yo was first introduced to the world by the Filipinos. As you may observe, great dexterity is required. This particular routine is what is known as baby in the cradle. Here we have a little number called spaghetti. And again, baby in the cradle. Howard Hill spots the target. There he goes. And it's a bullseye. By now, the pig is cooked and ready to serve. Boy, does that look good. Just look how tenderly the chef carves that masterpiece of culinary art. Roast pig. All right, boys and girls, come and get it. Noted for their proficiency with the bolo, only by actually witnessing them in action can one appreciate the wielder's true native skill with its wicked-looking weapon. A single-edged, razor-sharp blade, the bolo has long been employed in warfare by the Filipinos. One can't help but marvel at the precision and accuracy with which these weapons are handled. Feet is anchored. They touch blades as a form of salute. Howard Hill has something up his sleeve. What can it be? The bowlerist and archer exchange weapons. Here we have two primitive but deadly implements of war, the arrow and the bolo. Archer Hill explains what he has in mind to the bolo expert. Let's see what happens. Looks like a William Tell act. Yes, sir. Howard Hill is drawing a bead on the sharp edge of the bolo. It's on. What a shot. The arrow has left its mark on both sides. Good work, Howard Hill. As is the custom, all leishans are followed by a dance. In this case, the boys and girls get together with a native folk dance known as the caranosa. The caranosa depicts the courtship of a young couple, but it's done in groups. Somewhat similar to our square dancing formation, it's done with considerably more grace. The couples retain their same partner throughout the dance. A definite routine is followed. Each movement is significant of the various stages of the courtship, the wooing and winning of the maid. but not the story of the 2nd Filipino Regiment. For these are the heroes of America's first baptism of fire in the present global war, the veterans of Corregidor and Bataan. America salutes you, men of the 2nd Filipino Regiment, and is with you every step of the way to that not-so-distant day when the last enemy has been destroyed or driven from your land. God speed you on your march to victory.
Can anybody really hear me well? Because this mic is having some problems. Is it okay back there? When the film was shown here in San Jose in 1940, 45? I think it was 45. What theater was it? We all sat. Oh. Did you freeze it? Yeah, there she is. But can you see that? My sister Helen there, and Pasing is on the side. So Helen told us that when she's recruited, that first of all she had to learn the dance from Mrs. Tremelius. Mrs. Tremelius was well known in the community because she taught all of the Philippine traditional dances. When Helen got to the Camp Cook, she said it was tiring to do the film because Howard Hill wanted to do the scenes over and over again, and she got tired because she had to do the Carinosa so many times. But in so doing, she got well practiced and perfected. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today. But Pasing not only was one of the major leaders here in the community, but during the war, she was one of the activists that wanted the government to allow Filipinos to join the services. And after the activism for many of the Filipino organizations, the president finally signed an order to allow the Filipinos to form as a segregated unit, the 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry Regiment. In addition to the regiments, what is well known is that some of the Filipinos were taken from the regiments and were recruited to join the MIS, the Military Intelligence Services. One of the local Filipinos who did join was Del Regala, and I think the Regala family is here. Regalas?
Raise your hand.
The Regalas in the backyard? Now, those are the descendants of Del Regala and Sally Regala. Now, Del was one of those that was trained to go behind the enemy lines. He was landed via submarine, and he served there undercover, picking up intel on the Japanese troops there. And all of that information was then sent to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters. When I talked to Del years and years ago, he said he was caught. And I said, well, how did you survive? He said, well, they interrogated him and tortured him, but one of the methods of torture that he said was that he was forced to drink almost a gallon of water, and that he would jump on his stomach. But he survived that. Yeah, I don't know how, but when I looked at him at that time, he was in fine spirits. He didn't look like he had any problems at all. That's one of those hidden histories of Filipino history that you'll never hear. And there are many others of those that we have recorded in our interviews with the descendants of my generation of that Filipino history. And then speaking of the Filipino history, there are many other families that had contributed to the exhibits. Now, if you want, I can invite you, or you can volunteer, or I'll coerce you. And the other families want to come up here and share your stories. Is the Subnet family here? The Subnets?
Right there.
All right, come on up. Okay, the Subnets, do you want to come up and talk a little bit about the Subnet family? The Subnets family owned a store in Pinoytown called the Variety Store, 5 and Dime. Okay, anybody?
Refer to Betty.
You want to come up?
Betty.
Who else? Is there any other families that want to contribute a few moments to the story today?
How about the regalas, Robert?
Okay,
How about the regalas?
regalas.
Eric.
Okay.
Eric,
Eric Regala.
right there.
Eric Regala, my nephew. He's retired San Jose PD.
I'm Eric Regala. I guess you could say third gen. So I understand what she's talking about. She's talking about working in the fields because I was raised by my grandma Sally and my grandpa Dell, who was a master sergeant in the U.S. Army, 1st Infantry Regiment, Fort Ord, and he was a World War II vet. But my grandma Sally, my auntie Pasing, when she came here, she asked my grandma, who was born in Waipahu, Hawaii. She asked my grandma to come here at 13, so she came to California at 13 years old from Hawaii. So, and she had a house across the street from Santo Market. It's on the east side of 6th Street, and it was a duplex, and it's right across from Santo Market. They had that house right there on 6th Street, and it was a duplex, and according to my dad, that people used to rent that house out. Well, it was a duplex, but people used to stay there. They used to go to San Jose State or whatever. And apparently Mike Conda, the congressman, he rented it when he went to college or something like that. But anyways, the Regalas, the Filipinos that lived there in 6th Street and all around, I can name off names like the Mendozas, the Corpuses, Arevalos, Billy Roos, all of them know the Regalas. And those are just some of the names that grew up around that time. Peraltas, if you're around that time, the Peraltas, they were president of the Filipino Community Center, they know the Regalas. And so, the reason why I want to come up here and talk about it is because I understand you have to be around that generation to appreciate it. Because when you're around those people, just the way that they teach you stuff. Like, I remember as a kid, when the older folks used to come over, my grandma used to say, hey, your uncle's here, go get the ashtrays. And that's because they used to smoke all the time, so I used to have to go get the ashtrays. Make sure, hey, ask your auntie or your uncle, they want coffee, go get the coffee. But in the summertime, when I was like 8 years old, my grandma, so they moved from 6th Street and she bought 2 acres in Campbell. Now you gotta imagine this is Campbell, California, right down the street from Westmont. While my grandpa was in the war, she on her own went and got a loan and bought 2 acres in Campbell. So they had a flower business. And that's was her life. So as kids, me and my brother, we had to go work in the summertime in the flowers. Not like any other kids, they're riding bikes. We had to go, we stayed at my grandma's. We were raised by my grandma, because stuff happens with your parents. So we were raised by my grandma. So in the summertime, we're out there pulling weeds.
With Robert Montgomery and John Wayne. And in that movie, in the very beginning, when you see the announcement to the servicemen that Pearl Harbor was bombed and they're being all called to the duty stations, And Pasing is on the stage singing, I think it was God Bless America. Well, in 1943 summer, Pasing asked several Pinoys if they would be willing to gather together, learn to dance, and go down to entertain the servicemen. And my sister was one of them. But she was too young to go. She was only 15. So she asked my mom, Mary Ragsack, if she could go, but only if my mom was as the chaperone. So that was the arrangement. And she and four others, there were 6 Pinoys from the local area. They all went to Camp Cook and learned the Philippine dances. The popular one at the time was called the Carinosa. And also, it just so happens that Howard Hill, Hollywood director, wanted to film all the goings on, and he showed the entertainment of the Filipino troops. And there was a film made in summer of 43 and aired in 1944, and we have that particular film.
It'll show up on this screen too, for folks in the back.
Situated in a remote, prairie-like section of Phoenix, California, is Camp Cook, the training center of the United States Army's 2nd Filipino Regiment. But theirs is a double incentive, the liberation of their beloved country. To these men, there can be no compromise in their ultimate aim, the restoration of their land to its former states. Hour after hour of rigid training and strenuous military maneuvers brings them closer to the momentous task that lies ahead. But despite these arduous measures, and the fact that many miles separate them from their homeland and loved ones, they have not overlooked their native customs, games, and sports. Here we see what looks like an old-fashioned picnic. Well, actually it is, but to use the native term, it is known as a lechon. Translated literally, the word lechon means roast pig. But the meaning is all though now it is the equivalent of the American barbecue. Accompanied by their wives and sweethearts, this is a gala day for the boys of Camp Cook. Howard Hill, renowned traveler and world-famous archer, is frank to admit he's never seen anything that so impressed him as did his visit to Camp Cook. Besides the carefully prepared feast, consisting of such delicacies as barbecued pig, there are games and exhibitions. For instance, there is a demonstration of judo, the Filipino style of wrestling, in which all members of the 2nd Regiment excel. Besides the thorough knowledge of how to apply and break the numerous complicated holds, a cool head, responsive mind, and the agility of an acrobat are most essential. Judo is a real man's sport. Oh, pardon me, but the ladies like it too. Perhaps this will demonstrate that size or weight are of little or no advantage to the untrained opponent. To a skilled judoist, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Here's a simple way to ward off a bolo attack. Simple, if you know how. But that's judo. This is a steeple ball in the making, woven by hand either from rattan or bamboo strips. The basket-like ball is used in the native Filipino game, from which it derives its name, sipa. As the spectators gather around, the players take their places within the circle. The object of the game is to keep the ball in the air by kicking it. Any portion of the foot may be used. A good team of steeple players will often keep the ball in action for 10 minutes or more without allowing it to touch the ground. The skill of the player is in his footwork. So, Howard Hill wants to try it, eh? Well, come on. Here's the ball. Let's see how good you are. Here we go for the kickoff. That means you'll have to sit in the center of the ring and stay there until somebody else sits. But it looks as though he's going to have a long wait. Doesn't anybody ever miss? Look at that ball fly, and the players barely move from their original position. If something isn't done to stop it, this game is going far on into the night. It's a good trick if you can do it. And he did. So ends this round of keep-up. Here, with his yo-yo, is another expert from the ranks of our 2nd Filipino Regiment. A fascinating pastime. The yo-yo was first introduced to the world by the Filipinos. As you may observe, great dexterity is required. This particular routine is what is known as baby in the cradle. Here we have a little number called spaghetti. And again, baby in the cradle. Howard Hill spots the target. There he goes. And it's a bullseye. By now, the pig is cooked and ready to serve. Boy, does that look good. Just look how tenderly the chef carves that masterpiece of culinary art. Roast pig. All right, boys and girls, come and get it. Noted for their proficiency with the bolo, only by actually witnessing them in action can one appreciate the wielder's true native skill with its wicked-looking weapon. A single-edged, razor-sharp blade, the bolo has long been employed in warfare by the Filipinos. One can't help but marvel at the precision and accuracy with which these weapons are handled. Feet is anchored. They touch blades as a form of salute. Howard Hill has something up his sleeve. What can it be? The boloist and archer exchange weapons. Here we have two primitive but deadly implements of war, the arrow and the bolo. Archer Hill explains what he has in mind to the bolo expert. Let's see what happens. Looks like a William Tell act. Yes, sir. Howard Hill is drawing a bead on the sharp edge of the bolo. It's hard. Spoiler alert. The arrow has left its mark on both sides. Good work, Howard Hill. As is the custom, all Leshans are followed by a dance. In this case, the boys and girls get together with a native folk dance known as a caranosa. The caranosa depicts the courtship of a young couple, but is done in groups. Somewhat similar to our square dancing formation, it's done with considerably more grace. The couples retain their same partners throughout the dance. A definite routine is followed. Each movement is significant of the various stages of the courtship, the wooing and winning of the maid. thus ends the story of the Caranosa, but not the story of the 2nd Filipino Regiment. For these are the heroes of America's first baptism of fire in the present global war, the veterans of Corregidor and Bataan. America salutes you, men of the 2nd Filipino Regiment, and is with you every step of the way to that not-so-distant day when the last enemy has been destroyed or driven from your land. God speed you on your march to victory.
Can anybody really hear me well? Because this mic is having some problems. Is it okay back there? When the film was shown here in San Jose in 1940, 45? I think it was 45. What theater was it? We all sat. Oh. Did you freeze it? There she is. Can you see that? My sister, Helen? There. And Pasing is on the side. So, Helen told us that when she's recruited, that first of all she had to learn the dance from Mrs. Tremelius. Mrs. Tremelius was well known in the community because she taught all of the Philippine traditional dances. When Helen got to the Camp Cook, she said it was tiring to do the film because Howard Hill wanted to do the scenes over and over again, and she got tired because she had to do the Caranosa so many times. But in so doing, she got well practiced and perfected. This is unfortunately she couldn't be here today, but Pasing not only was one of the major leaders here in the community, but during the war, she was one of the activists that wanted the government to allow Filipinos to join the services. And after the activism for many of the Filipino organizations, the president finally signed an order to allow the Filipinos to join, to form as a segregated unit, the 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry Regiment. In addition to the regiments, what is well known is that some of the Filipinos were taken from the regiments and were recruited to join the MIS, the Military Intelligence Services. One of the local Filipinos who did join was Del Regala, and I think the Regala family is here. Regalas?
Raise your hand.
The Regalas in the backyard? Now, those are the descendants of Del Regala and Sally Regala. Now, Del was one of those that was trained to go behind the enemy lines. He was landed via submarine, and he served there undercover, picking up intel on the Japanese troops there. And all of that information was then sent to General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters. When I talked to Del years and years ago, he said he was caught. And I said, well, how did you survive? He said, well, they interrogated him and tortured him, but one of the methods of torture that he said was that he was forced to drink almost a gallon of water, and that he would jump on his stomach. But he survived that. Yeah, I don't know how, but when I looked at him at that time, he was in fine spirits. He didn't look like he had any problems at all. That's one of those hidden histories of Filipino history that you'll never hear. And there are many others of those that we have recorded. in our interviews with the descendants of my generation of that Filipino history. And then speaking of the Filipino history, there are many other families that had contributed to the exhibits. Now, if you want, I can invite you, or you can volunteer, or I'll coerce you. And you have families want to come up here and share your stories. Is the Subnet family here? The Subnets?
One of them.
Right there.
All right, come on up. Okay, the Subnets, do you want to come up and talk a little bit about the Subnet family? The Subnets family owned a store in Pinoytown called the Variety Store, 5 and Dime. Okay, anybody?
Referred to Betty.
You want to come up?
Betty.
Who else? Is there any other families that want to contribute a few moments to the story today?
How about the regalas, Robert?
Okay,
How about the regalas?
Regalas,
Eric.
okay.
Eric.
Eric Regala.
Right there.
Eric Regala, my nephew. He's retired San Jose PD.
I'm Eric Regala. I guess you can say third gen. So I was actually, I understand what she's talking about. She's talking about working in the fields because I was raised by my grandma Sally and my grandpa Dell, who was a master sergeant in the U.S. Army, 1st Infantry Regiment, Fort Ord, and he was a World War II vet. My grandma Sally, my auntie Pasing, when she came here, she asked my grandma, who was born in Waipahu, Hawaii. She asked my grandma to come here at 13, so she came to California at 13 years old from Hawaii. So, and she had a house across the street from Santo Market. It's on the east side of 6th Street, and it was a duplex, and it's right across from Santo Market. They had that house right there on 6th Street, and it was a duplex, and according to my dad, people used to rent that house out. Well, it was a duplex, but people used to stay there. They used to go to San Jose State or whatever. And apparently Mike Honda, the congressman, he rented it when he went to college or something like that. But anyways, the Regalas, the Filipinos that lived there in 6th Street and all around, I can name off names like the Mendozas, the Corpuses, Arevalos, Billy Ruse, all of them know the Regalas. And those are just some of the names that grew up around that time. Peraltas, if you're around that time, the Peraltas, they were president of the Filipino Community Center. They know the Regalas. And so the reason why I want to come up here and talk about it is because I understand you have to be around that generation to appreciate it. Because when you're around those people, just the way that they teach you stuff. Like, I remember as a kid, when the older folks used to come over, my grandma used to say, "Hey, your uncle's here, go get the ashtrays." That's because they used to smoke all the time, so I used to have to go get the ashtrays. Make sure, hey, ask your auntie or your uncle, they want coffee, go get the coffee. But in the summertime, when I was like 8 years old, my grandma, so they moved from 6th Street and she bought 2 acres in Campbell. Now you gotta imagine this. This is Campbell, California, right down the street from Westmont. While my grandpa was in the war, she on her own went and got a loan and bought 2 acres in Campbell. So they had a flower business. And that's was her life. So as kids, me and my brother, we had to go work in the summertime in the flowers. Not like any other kids, they're riding bikes. We had to go. We stayed at my grandma's. We were raised by my grandma because stuff happens with your parents. So we were raised by my grandma. So in the summertime, we're out there pulling weeds, different little I used to pick grapes with them in the lawn. It's just that. That's how they knew. He knew all these different Filipinos. But he'd make a phone call. They tell him where the game was. and then you go to all these weird different places, but it was a camp. Like, it's like a trailer, and then it's like a trailer, and they just have all these old Filipinos, and then, you know, that's what they did. And then they're out there playing pasoy, you know, or papito, whatever you guys call it, and they're out there gambling, and, you know, the ladies cooking food, and they have the sabong, and I'm sitting there at like 8, 9, 10 years old learning how they do it. But this was in the 70s. I'm a 60s baby. But in the 70s, they're doing this stuff in Watsonville, Stockton, and nobody bothered them. No, these Filipinos, they didn't bother nobody. And the police, when they would raid it, they would just send one car. They wouldn't send everybody to come, you know, arrest them. It's just one car just to break it up, and the Philippines would all get, you know, just like scatter. But I'll tell you something real funny real quick, just a little off. There's an old Filipino, I'll remember this, he's a Filipino guy, he's like in a wheelchair. We were at the chicken fights, and he's in a wheelchair, the whole day he's in a wheelchair. Could barely walk. But when the police came, that dude got out the wheelchair and but anyways, so that's just part of the heritage of growing up was, you know, that kind of stuff. I was like, I never knew that, you know. And then working in the flowers, you know, I just remember my grandma and my grandpa saying, okay, go to Chinatown. They used to always refer to it as Chinatown. Where are you going? Oh, we're going to go to Chinatown. Oh, it's Chinatown. What's Chinatown? But it was what they were saying was Chinatown. That was it. And then, so that if you guys go down to Chinatown, it's those duplexes. But before that, it used to be a courtyard. When I was in the police department, that we used to gas our police cars right across the street. It used to be the courtyard. But that was Chinatown. And before they built the cross from Nishioka and all that stuff. So it's like before those. If you go there now, it's like, I don't know, they're duplexes now, or what are they, apartments? Yeah. But before that, it was Chinatown, and then after that, it used to be the courtyard. They used to have city cars, but we used to gas our patrol cars over there. But you know, it's changed. And I used to, as a kid, I used to remember going to Nishioka's, and they had stuff the wooden floor. You know, it's like all wooden, and you smell like fish in there and all that stuff. And I remember Nishioka's. I remember the Washi, because I went to school with one of the Washi girls back in San Jose. A long time ago, I remember Hank's, the fishing place downtown. And I always remember my grandma used to always say, chop suey. Go get chop suey. And I used to say chop suey. But they always used to refer Chinese food as chop suey instead of Chinese food as chop suey, always like that. But yeah, it was always referred downtown as Chinatown. But you know, growing up around them, you have to understand that it was different. It was like they said, they used to always wear the hats, the brims, you know, like that. They used to always, they were dressed sharp. I remember those Filipinos when, like my grandpa Del would go to church Sundays. He'd wear a suit all the time. They always pray. My grandma would say, set the table, say prayers before you eat, that kind of stuff like that. It was always, if you're sitting down like this, make sure the elders, hey, get up, your auntie, your grandpa, and you get up out of your seat, let them sit down first. As a kid, that's what I was taught before, you know. Don't swear in front of your elders, you know, that kind of stuff. I don't know if, you know, it might have changed, but when you're around that generation, it was always respect, you know, always, you gotta respect them. You hug them, open the door for them, ask them how they're doing, you know. It's just, you had to be there at that time. You know, I was fortunate that I was around when they were still alive. But you know, the thing I gotta tell you is the younger ones, if you have grandparents, I wish I would have sat down and just asked them more. You know, soak it up, like just ask them. Because sometimes you just take it for granted and then they're gone. You're like, damn, I should have asked more. Like, you know, what'd you do in the war? You know, what happened during this time? You know, why do they call it Chinatown? You know, like, you know, I just, as a kid, you don't even ask that, but you should. You know, you should ask this kind of questions when they're still alive. But just, it was different. Like in the 70s, I'm not like their age, but I understand what they're talking about. It was different times. It was the Filipinos, those old Filipinos back then. Yeah, I used to go in the community center, and they're smoking cigars, and they're, like I said, the Filipino community center was always open, and they were always in. You walk in there, and they're either smoking cigars, or playing rummy, or playing cards, and they're all standing out in the front, like with their hats, and either listening to the Giants baseball game or watching TV. But it was always open before. Now the community center's not even open. But it was active before. Back in the 70s, they were in the 80s. They were active. Somebody was always in that community center. You can always go in there, and somebody's in there. They used to have food all the time too in there. So, anyways, if you're younger and you have grandparents, talk to them, ask them what's going on. Just talk to them and ask them, how they live. That way, you're not going to forget it, because I'm glad they're still alive, and I was able to talk to my grandparents. Anyways, that's all I got to say.
Erica is my niece through my littlest sister, Joni. Joni, stand up. You're my little sister. Okay, now, there's another branch of the Ragsacks. Now, which one of you, Effie, Arlene, or Roy, wants to say something?
Roy wants to say something.
The oldest sister says Roy is going to say something.
I am.
You are.
I am, I guess, yeah.
Roy Ronsack, my cousin.
Okay, I'm gonna make this short. Okay, Robert earlier talked about how his parents met. So I'm gonna give you a rough story how my parents met. So I'm actually half Filipino. I'm Italian, Irish, French, and German. So my grandfather, he was French and Italian, or Sicilian, the hardcore. If you saw a picture of him, he's got his jacket on, his head looked like the mafia. So picture that. And then my mom, she was Irish and German. I mean, my grandmother. Okay, so when my dad came over, he worked the fields, Stockton, San Jose, all over. And at one time, he was in San Jose working, right here on 5th Street. So, there was a boarding house on 5th Street. So he stayed at the boarding house, and right next door is where my mom lived. And that's on 5th and Empire. So I guess, he's, a young Italian lady and a young Filipino. They kind of got eyes, and they kind of, liked each other. So, but my grandfather, being pure Italian, French, he didn't like my dad at all. So, and so when my dad he joined the service. He was in service just for basic training. He was too old, so they let him go with honorable discharge. And he said when he'd come back from the army, he wanted to marry my mom. So the story goes, I always get this a little confused, but the story goes, my mom was in the house, my grandmother was holding the window open for my mom to come out. My grandfather was on the porch with a shotgun. Robert's dad, my uncle, was in the getaway car with Auntie Claudia down the street. So they got in the car, and off they took to Vancouver, Washington. I guess they were able to get married there. So.
Because it was against the law here.
Yeah, here racial marriages was not heard of. So.
No, it was against the law.
Yeah. But one other little quick thing, growing up with my dad, mostly, every time okay, out of I'm sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
You got it.
Between me and my siblings, I think I was, well, no disgrace for you, but I think I was more Filipino. Everywhere my dad went, I would jump in the car and I would go with him no matter where he went. So sometimes we went to his friends. We did yard work. I pulled weeds. We go to the ranch. There were times when I was a little kid, I would go to the farm with him. And even though it's raining, we're out there cutting lettuce. We're doing whatever. And at break time, we'd come back. All we had was some cold coffee and maybe half a peanut butter sandwich. That's what we had. But all the other times, my dad would always go to, with all my uncles, they would all go to cook for the big parties. And being a little kid, I'd be there also. We'd be slaughtering the pigs. I was what you call a blood stirrer when we made the dinuguan. So when they slaughter the pig, I'm there stirring the blood with the vinegar and the salt and all that stuff. And I remember coming home, my pants were as stiff as tar because it had blood all over them too. So, but growing up with my dad, I learned to cook. That's one thing I appreciate. I mean, Filipino dish, whatever you want, I'll cook it for you. So, and I'm only half Filipino. These guys here, they're full-blooded Filipino, and what do you know how to cook, Robert? Yeah, I mean, growing up, we weren't racial or anything. We grew up with all mixed people around us, and we never even knew what racial meant, you know. So, and being Filipino, I'm proud to be Filipino, and the other ones too.
I have to mention that and this is confirmed by Myrna, when you write your family story and you start searching, you look through the old albums, you start picking up the pictures of your mom and your dad or your grandpa. It's emotional. And Myrna can attest to that, because I felt that way too. I've gone through my family history many times. I write the family history for the Ragsacks, for the Sergio Ragsack and Mary Ragsack family. But when I started accumulating the material just for this exhibit, I would sit at my laptop and stop, because I couldn't write anymore. Myrna told me the same thing that she did, and we all shared our tears. So that brings me to the point. For sure, regardless if your family is from the Philippines, or Australia, or Germany, or England, write your family's whole story. Get your mom's story. If they're from the Philippines, why did you live in the Philippines? You know, what prompted you? What did you do here? You know, when you were a kid, what school did you go to? Write it down. Particularly the Filipino history, because Filipino history is not part of the American mainstream history. So, write your mom and dad's history, and including yours, because your kids are going to ask, Mom, Dad, what did you do? What high school did you go to? Did you play basketball? Dad, did you play football? So all of that would become part of the American mainstream. The second part to that is write a family tree, so that you can find relationships for the younger generations, like in Kiki's case with all his great-great-great-great-grandchildren, that he can relate. Did I miss one great? So they can find out and see the family tree about their relationships. And that's important for them and for us, for your story to continue. So, now, that's usually my final comment. Does anybody have a comment that they would like to make, that they would like to talk about or say something? Okay, I was way in the back, somebody raised their hand.
You guys take questions or?
Yeah, he wants to ask a question. Go.
Hello, hi. My name is Preston. I go to Mission College, so yeah, that's who I am. I have a question for like y'all that grew up like way back then. So I think it's still it's like a common struggle with like Filipino Americans, but it's like, did you guys grow up like speaking Tagalog or just English? But it's like a struggle still to like try to connect back with the culture. It's like for some reason, and if you look at like the other like Hispanics, even like Chinese, like they still teach their language to like their younger generation. But what's your guys' take on like Filipinos not like just like spreading the culture like through the language?
I can throw some out there. Robert, I can ask you
Can I
that.
say something here?
Robert, I can ask you something.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I have to tell you that
Your mind is blank.
I have to say that in our time, growing up, our parents had gone through some racial, conflicts. So they wanted us to speak English because the schools did not allow you to have bilingual. It's a terrible thing, but that's how we grew up. In our generation, whether you're in Sacramento, Stockton, our generation all spoke English because our parents had a very difficult time. So, and I think that's terrible because I would love to know how to speak Ilocano, Tagalog, Visayan. But because they had gone through our parents had gone through some tough times, we had to speak English. So when I worked at Intel, a lot of the Filipino gals said, "Oh, you're Ilocano?" I go, "Yeah." They start talking. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." And he said, "Well, what kind of Filipino are you?" I said, "Well, there's a long story. Go back. It's the way we grew up. That's the way things were for us. It was a very tough time for us." Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You have a comment? Oh, go ahead. You have a comment?
No, I think there's another question on the floor, anyway, let me get this real fast. Yes, I understand what Lang is saying because my parents told me to speak English as well, but my younger brother could speak it, my older brother could speak it and understand it as well. So I put a block into my learning experience there. So it wasn't that you could not, it's that whether they were telling you or teaching you at home so that you could participate in the language. I miss it. I wish I could speak the language because it would have made me more effective as a community worker as well. And to relate to the people from my own community. And when I go back to the Philippines, I have to have a translator for me. So I feel left out. I mean, honestly, I do. I understand it and I accept that. But there's a certain blockage that takes place when you on the other side who are Filipino who speak two dialects or maybe dialect now is Tagalog, because now you're an outsider because you're not a full Filipino. You're an American Filipino. When I visited the islands on my second trip, my cousin who works in the government high up said, "You're not Filipino, you're an American." And he said it this way, "You're not Filipino." Okay? So that's how we became Filipino. We had our own language. We created our own accent. Okay? And that gave us our connection of speaking like, "Hello." Okay? So I'm not Joe Coy, but that's what happened. And so we developed our own language. We related to each other with that Filipino mimic. When we came to meeting someone from the Philippines, they thought we were mimicking them. There was fights. We would break out into fights. Only because we were acting as Filipinos as we knew it, but the person from the Philippines thought we were making fun of them. Okay, so that caused a lot of blockage for us to be united earlier in life when we should have been there right away. So no one was there to intervene when we had conflict. And that's part of what happens in community work, is that you have to bring those opposing things together. And it's tough. It really is hard because you're not accepted. You're the system, not because you speak English. And so they created their own groups of politicians, and they became opposition to that, but they all want the same thing, just that they want to do it differently, their way. This is Filipino way we do it. This is how we do it in the Philippines. But this is the United States. This is how it's done here. You know, the bridge has to be crossed, okay? Go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, I can answer his question in some ways too. But as growing up as a Filipino American, it just seemed like all the Filipinos I knew from the Philippines, you know, like my dad's relatives, all the Filipinos, it was amazing that somehow they all spoke English. I mean, I was just wondering because, you know, I knew people from Japan that came to know how to speak English, but it just seemed like every time someone came from the Philippines for the first time to this country, they knew how to speak English. So I asked my wife, because she's from the Philippines, because when I met her, she spoke good English. So I just asked her, how come, you know, when Filipinos, when I was young growing, you know, this is back in the 40s, you know, how did they know how to speak English already? You know, they didn't have to go to school with some, you know, other countries that were here, that came here, didn't know how to speak English. Well, my wife told me that in the Philippines, one of their language, when they went to school, that was even my dad's time when he went, that was back like, you know, 1920 or 19 whatever, you know, the late 20s, and he said that when he went to school in Kabugao, they had to learn English. So when a lot of the Filipinos came here, it was coincidence, a lot of them knew how to speak English. So, and then later on they got, you know, married different nationalities. So, like I said, it was all carried on with the other generations like me, because I don't know how to speak. I know the bad words, but I don't know the good words, you know, because whatever. But I think when most Filipinos came here, even the early generations, it was amazing how a lot of them knew how to speak English because they had to somehow learn to speak English. And the Tagalog, if you were different dialects like Visayans or Ilocanos, but I think they had to learn how to speak Tagalog and English. So that's one of my answers, but I think too, like when a lot of the Filipinos came here, they were already exposed to the English language, you know, so that's my answer. Okay.
We have another question. Go ahead.
So I spoke Ilocano because my parents spoke to us, and they also knew English. But when I started school, my sisters and I were put into these, were taken out of the class to get rid of our accents. And so now I'm trying to learn Ilocano, going on YouTube and watching these people teaching us Ilocano, and in fact, in just last couple of days. And when this woman was teaching us how to count the numbers, my memory clicked in, and I started crying. I started bawling because my memory came back that I knew how to speak it, but it was drummed out of us. And I was also told by other Filipinos, but you're born here. You're not Filipino, just like you did. And I also do that with my husband. I talk English in a Filipino accent, try to keep it alive. And But anyway, it's very emotional when I did my exhibit that is on the 8th floor. I had to stop many times when I was going over my father's history and looking at all of the pictures. I would stop and I would just bawl and cry. And because I didn't ask my parents how the war was for them, and I wish I knew more. So this was a great experience putting this together. I wanted to do it for my daughters, and it was good for me because it gave me a deeper understanding of my parents and what they went through to provide a good life for us here. But one thing I do remember growing up is every weekend we would always go to somebody's home, either in San Jose, Oakland, San Francisco, wherever, because there was always Filipino parties and there were so many uncles and aunties. And I couldn't remember all their names, so everybody that was a male was an uncle. Every woman was an auntie, and yeah, or manang, or manong, and I was an ading because I was young. It makes me really sad to know that that generation is gone, because they were the ones that kept us all together, really tight, because they all came from the same place in the Philippines. And now all of us children are dispersed with our own families, and we don't have that to bring us together. And I think this is the start for us to gain that back, because it's that sense of community that I really miss. So thank you.
Well, I think we've got enough time for everybody to go up to the exhibits if you haven't gone through already. And is there any finger food left? Because I'm hungry. There is? Okay, everybody go back there and get some finger food and get up to the exhibits. What? Go up to the exhibits on the 5th floor.